Hi, this is Eric Bibb. You're listening to me with John Broughton on Retrospective, KC Radio 97.7 FM. Okay.
Of course, just to begin, your dad was a wonderful singer himself and a great civil rights campaigner. And you would have been just a boy at the height of that folk boom of the early 60s that your dad was very much a part of. No doubt, though, it left a profound impact on you.
Indeed, it did. Young I might have been, but keen to absorb all that was around me, I was. And I remember being allowed at the tender age of 11 to travel in from the suburbs on the subway, an hour and a half journey to Washington Square Park on Sunday mornings to basically hang out with all the folkies who were around the fountain making all kinds of music on all kinds of instruments. So I had my guitar and I was just, in awe, really. But my parents thought that freedom was something that would really inspire me as it did. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember your first guitar?
Yes, it was not a great instrument. Actually, the first guitar that I started playing was my dad's, a very interesting little guitar from Italy that was nice. But I don't know what happened to that, but the first guitar that was mine was a cheapo, and I remember the action was too high, so I really had a hard time. It's a steel string guitar. I had a hard time playing it, and I was quite frustrated in the very early days. But that changed. Eventually I got better instruments, and the best thing was that my dad's guitar players, because my dad was accompanied by guitarists throughout his career, often had instruments that they would lend me on a long-term basis, that were really quality instruments. I remember a nylon string Gibson that I once borrowed for a long time, a great Guild 12 string. So yeah, it went from bad to good pretty quickly.
I believe you actually got a little bit of guitar advice from Bob Dylan at one point.
Yeah, my dad had one of those big showbiz parties where he invited all of his colleagues to a big bash at our home. We had a house in Queens, and this was the wintertime, December, I believe. And some people showed up who were already kind of luminaries on the folk scene. I think 2/3 of Peter, Paul, and Mary showed up. I remember a conversation I had with Peter Yarrow. And around 11 o'clock, my parents said, well, I don't think Dylan's going to show up, Eric, and he's kind of known for that. So off to bed with you. And I went upstairs, and a little later I heard a bit of a commotion downstairs, and I realized that the noise level had gone up for a reason, and I peeked downstairs, and there he was, in the middle of the living room. So I put on my robe, and I went down, and I went up to him. After a break in the people were crowding around him, but I went up to him and I said, hey, I'm Eric, and I play guitar too. And he said, well, keep it simple, forget all the fancy stuff. And I think he was just in his Woody Guthrie mode, trying to tell me that the commercial folk business part of the folk scene was hyped, and that I should stick to the roots, that kind of thing. That was when I reflect on what he said. That's what I think he meant.
That's a lovely story. Considering your family background, was it always inevitable that your career path was going to be musically orientated, or was there a time when you had a completely different career path in mind?
I never had a completely different path. My parents might have had one in mind. I went to Columbia University for a brief moment, and I thought they were not discouraging my musical aspirations, but on the other hand, they were not really my cheerleaders, in the sense that they definitely wanted me to consider options. But for me, I never really thought of career. My dad was a professional. I'd see him on TV. I'd see him in concert. All I wanted to do was play guitar and sing, and listen to records and learn songs And I suppose somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought that would turn into a career, but it was never the career part of it. The part that really hooked me was the actual music, the songs, you know.
Hmm. And of course, in later years, when your own career was already well established, you actually got to record a couple of albums with your dad, and you must really treasure those records now.
I certainly do. I'm looking at a picture of him on the kitchen wall, and you know, every time that I have a musical epiphany or something that happens that really excites me musically, I look up at him and I say, you know, thank you, because he was really the key to this world that I live in.
So even though as a young boy you had access to many wonderful musicians through your family connections, you were still very much a self-taught musician as far as guitar playing goes. Was that born out of a desire to really just develop your own style?
Well, it's funny. I say self-taught sometimes, but the fact is, um, my style of playing is derived from several big influences. I did have a very serious classical guitar teacher. He was serious. I was not a serious student, but I was a serious lover of the guitar. So what I gleaned from the lessons with Myron Weiss was some technique, which served me well later when I started finger picking. But it really was the fact that he made it clear that the guitar was an orchestra, basically, that you could do amazing things, counterpuntal things. Um, and if you used all your thumb and three fingers on your right hand, you could really come up with a lot of different sounds and ways, techniques of playing. So I credit those classical guitar lessons. I also took some lessons from a jazz teacher who, again, was disappointed in my performance as a student because I was really more interested in my own pursuit of singing and writing and learning songs. But I did pick up quite a lot of musical theory, and you know, I went to a musical high school. So I would say that my guitar playing is derived from a couple of you know, important sources, but it's pretty much my own thing. Even the finger picking thing, you know, I bought those tablature books that people like Stefan Grossman and Woody Mann put out, where they transcribed the finger picking patterns of some of my heroes. So I looked into that, but I was never really satisfied with uh, copying somebody else's way of playing, even if I liked the song they were singing. So by trial and error, over time, I developed, you know, my own way, which is similar to other people's playing, but also unique, I think.
Yeah. You would have been a teenager in the 60s when rock and roll music was going through so many changes, great changes. Were you a rock and roll fan at that time, or were you so entrenched in the traditional folk and blues sounds that you couldn't be
No,
swayed?
thank you for the question because it's a telling one. I was exposed to all kinds of music in my home and in my school, and you know, socially. So it was the gamut from, you know, Ravel to Otis Redding to Mississippi John Hurt to you know, Victoria de Los Angeles to Yo-Yo Ma to John Coltrane to Pharoah Sanders to Miles Davis to my uncle John Lewis. I really had an exposure that is enviable to so many wonderful types of music from a very early age. So even though I was personally focused on the folk stuff that I was listening to, you know, whether it was Big Bill Brunsey or Leadbelly or Odetta or Judy Collins, um, I was listening to the Soul Station. I was listening to, you know, the Beatles. Um, so I really heard everything that was around. I really did.
You spent a large portion of your life living away from the land of your birth, in what ways has that influenced and affected the music that you've made through the years?
Another great question, which I could go on and on about.
Mhm.
Uh, for one thing, being outside of America from a fairly young age, and I traveled to Europe with my parents as a young teenager. I had a 13th birthday in Kiev and stopped in Stockholm, where I live close to now, on my way home to New York with my parents. So that international kind of view, and later living in Europe, where many musicians from all over the world seem to flock to Stockholm at a certain time, jazz musicians, folk musicians. I would say that the eclectic background that I had was, amplified by my moving to Europe. I think had I stayed in the States, um, I would not necessarily have had such a broad palette, at least as a listener, but also as a player. I remember I wanted to collaborate with musicians from different parts of the world early on when I came to Europe. Kora players from West Africa, a tropical harp player from Venezuela. The list goes on. So I would say moving to Europe really had a kind of nutritious effect by exposing me in person, not only on records, but to musicians from a lot of different parts of the world. I also think that had I stayed in the States, the pressure as a budding musician to basically find a sound and a niche would have been greater, and my experimenting would have been less, and I probably would have focused on something more uh, specific earlier on. But it took me a while to really discover uh, what was really my strengths.
Mm.
And I had the freedom to do that because I was not in New York, the high pressure music business hub. I was somewhere else.
Was it a difficult decision to make at the time? Because you were only late in your late teens, weren't you, when you left?
I was 19 or 20 years old when I moved to Europe. It wasn't a difficult decision because I was actually fed up with what was going on in the States, um, frustrated and saddened by the collapse of what was once a real broad coalition of people who were like-minded and believed in the civil rights movement that was spearheaded by Dr. King. Um, there was a lot of breakdowns of those kinds of coalitions. Socially, things got very, like now, divisive. And I was disheartened. And I also was fed up with the racism that was becoming more and more virulent, at least towards the end of the 60s, like I said, when the civil rights movement kind of dissolved somehow. Um, Everything just seemed to get more intense and vitriolic. So, yeah, I decided I needed to find out who I was in another environment, that wasn't so tainted uh, by all of this divisiveness. Yeah.
Mm. I see you often labelled as a blues player, but I've always seen you as a troubadour type storyteller, singer songwriter that encompasses a whole mixture of musical genres and styles. Does that sit comfortably with you when you see yourself pigeonholed in that blues category?
No, I accept that to an extent because I understand that the business is still focused on uh, putting people in boxes, and there's even something deeper behind that. There is a kind of segregation going on that reflects segregation in the outer society that's extant in the music business. But I've always pushed back against it from a very early point in my career, when it became a career. I wanted to make it clear to people that although I embraced the blues and it was a huge inspirational source for me as a songwriter and a performer, um, with an accent on country blues, the acoustic side of the music. Um, However influential that was, it was mixed in with all the other things that were important to me as a young musician growing up in New York. I heard Joni Mitchell, in 1968, Jerry Jeff Walker up close. So the singer-songwriter thing printed very early with me.
Mm.
Um, the storytelling thing was something that developed over time, where I realized that I really did want to sort of be a voice for some of my heroes and sheroes who probably couldn't say the things in their time and place that they were feeling. Um, and I was in a position to maybe be a kind of mouthpiece for some of those sentiments, and that became important to me. But I also must say that the blues circuit internationally, and in Europe particularly, is strong and vibrant, and it's provided through festivals and clubs a whole slew of opportunities for working. So I realized that because I could jump on that bandwagon to an extent, um, it was a better career move to call myself an acoustic blues player and leave it at that if I had to, just because it was going to bring me on board a circuit where I would be uh, given opportunities to play and make money. Had I just claimed I'm just a musician, I'm a singer, songwriter, I'm an eclectic musician with jazz influences, whatever, I think it would have been harder for me to market myself, you know.
Mm.
So you make those kind of decisions. It's kind of your acquiescence to the music business, the part of the music business that's changing and hopefully will keep changing, you know, because this pigeonholing is really about the bean counters agenda. It's not about the musician's agenda.
Yeah, yeah. Well put. Talking about your songwriting, there seems to be an increased percentage of your recent works that have been songs based on social political commentary, and it's always been a part of your work, but it seems to be more so in recent times. Has that been something that's just come about considering the state of the world in recent times, or have you just been
Yeah.
naturally inspired to write songs of that nature?
Well, it's funny. I love to write songs about other stuff, love songs, travel songs, and I have. But the proportion of songs that deal with what I would even call just human issues, human interest issues. You know, people talk, as soon as you talk about stuff like racism, uh, people tend to think of you as a political writer. For me, this is not about politics. This is the human story that has affected us all, and some people more than others. And I want people to understand that as soon as you talk about social issues, that doesn't make you a protest singer or a political writer. It just makes you somebody who's concerned about using art to help the community evolve in a better way, you know. So yeah, I own that shift, you know, towards more uh, socially oriented songs or historically oriented songs because I really like telling stories, uh, true stories about people and events that will hopefully make people curious enough to do their own research. And
Mm-hmm.
my concern is that there is afoot political movements whose agenda is basically deleting from history important, uncomfortable stories. So if I can influence that and tip the scales another way and restore to the historical record some important information, then I'll do that, you know.
I read another interview with you recently where you described your album output as you being something of a conveyor belt. And it's very true. You have been putting out albums at a much greater rate than many artists would in this age of streaming where albums are probably of less prominence than they used to be. But you're
Right.
obviously still very much a believer of the album format.
Well, because of what I want to say, if I was just a, a tunesmith who wanted to create a pop hit, um, then this whole concept album thing wouldn't be so interesting to me. But I grew up, you know, formed by uh, the great concept albums of the '60s, you know, and that left a big impression on me. Saying something in 12 or 14 songs that was a cohesive message about what the writer was perceiving. And to me, it's become really important to use this platform as a musician to actually contribute to an important conversation that's going on globally about where we're at and what we're doing with each other and to each other. So the conveyor belt thing about putting out a lot of music, back in the '60s when I was buying my own LPs um, regularly, as soon as a band album came out or an Otis Redding album came out, I was down at the record store buying it. Um, but in those days, artists were putting out two albums, three albums a year.
That's
Some
true.
of these,
Yeah.
So I think the shift to lesser output has something to do with the industry's pressure on artists to basically follow their lead. It's like we have a marketing plan and we need this much time to sell this many units. So backpedal on your productivity. And then, the money thing started coming into it. People started spending 6 months making, a year making, a 10-song album with a huge budget. And you're thinking, oh, really? Is that what it's really about? Um, I've had the good fortune of befriending an amazing producer, Glenn Scott, who's been with me making records for the last 2 decades at least. And he is as ambitious as I am. And in the middle of finishing an album, I might send him a song that doesn't belong on that album. And he'll be excited about that. And he'll do uh, a demo and file it away in a folder. And the songs mount up. We just have a whole trove of songs that are in one form or another of completion. So I'm going to keep going.
It's good news for all of us. Being someone that spends a great proportion of their time traveling and touring, having that virtually taken away from you over the past couple of years, how did you cope with the adjustment?
It was for me, and from what I've been able to tell from talking to other musicians, I'm not unique in saying that the pandemic definitely had an upside for me. Um, First of all, I was in need of some rest. I was, traveling almost constantly, and not even realizing uh, how actually draining that can be. Um, to be able to stay home, make my own food, find my own daily rhythms again that weren't based on rushing to an airport was really healing for me. Um, it also gave me a chance to look over my back catalog and actually rediscover songs that I'd even forgotten I'd written, uh, relearn them. I started a Patreon page where I posted 3 songs a week. Um, Performances that were filmed here at home. So it really put me in touch with my back catalog and kept me playing and singing. So I had the benefit of being in a restful place out in the country, still being able to stay in contact with my fan base, and still being able to keep writing and playing. So for me, as a songwriter who, you know, is supported by royalties. I had enough of a back catalog to keep me going, and the Patreon page and private Zoom lessons, guitar lessons, all over the world. So we didn't suffer. We actually benefited from the hiatus.
Have you found that your desire to get out there and tour again internationally has been rejuvenated by the time you've had off, or didn't it really need rejuvenation?
Yes, it was rejuvenated. I had actually been kind of like I realized early on in the pandemic, really in need of the rest. But with this Australian tour coming up, which is the most ambitious tour yet, uh, I'm excited. And I'm glad it's Australia because it's one of the places where I really enjoy traveling around. There are other territories that are less attractive to me, but the work is, welcome. But the fact that the first real tour after the pandemic for me is in Australia is a real blessing.
It certainly is an extensive tour. Just looking at your schedule, you're playing in some regional areas, not just sticking to the main cities. You're really getting out and
Yeah.
about. Is that something you do in other parts of the world, putting yourself in places that may not get to see many international artists come through their town?
Yes, it's true. Because I'm an acoustic, folk-oriented, roots-oriented musician and not a pop star, as it were, um, the agents who I've been working with in different territories, Canada, USA, uh, parts of Europe, England, um, they tend to have a circuit that is more culturally based uh, and not so much commercially driven, even though that's a big part of it. So there are out of the way art centers in all of these territories, uh, roots music clubs that have been favorites of mine. In fact, my favorite gigs are not in major cities. Yeah, I've just deduced that the best gigs for me are in places where there is uh, a group of very dedicated music lovers who have really put their heart and soul into a venue and make it work and have cultivated, you know, subscription base of music lovers who are probably not as are not able to access the music that they love as easily as some people in major cities who become a
Mm.
little blasé. So these are enthusiastic fans who really long to see, somebody that they like, and I like that.
You're doing some band shows and solo shows while you're here. Does the set list vary from in between the type of show you're doing?
It will vary. It won't be completely different because many of the songs that I can do solo are also songs that work well with the band. So it won't be like an A and B list, but it'll be kind of like A, B, B, A. There will be a mixture of both. I'm really looking forward to the solo shows um, just because I haven't done a solo tour in Australia. I mean, I've been in a while at least. I remember the first time I came out, I was with bassist Dave Bronze, and that was a wonderful first experience of Australia. But playing solo requires a whole another mindset and can I say authority, and I've been able to develop that during this Patreon era, pandemic era, um, because I focused on playing my songs as a solo artist. So I'm really looking forward to flexing those muscles in front of an audience. It was always my dream to be a self-accompanying troubadour, who could hold his own uh, just with a guitar, and I think I'm getting there.
Most certainly. And I believe there's going to be a new album coming off the conveyor belt around the time of your tour here as well.
Exactly. I think we'll have it available at least as a merch item. I don't know if it will be officially released until just about the end of the Australian tour, but the album is called Ridin', like riding, but without the G, Ridin'. And that's the title song. And it's an album that I think is my best work yet. Um, it's about all kinds of things, but there's a focus on, as you mentioned earlier, there's a focus on historical events, and the civil rights movement is referred to in several songs in some way. It's not um, not a political album. It's like I said, it's an album that deals with stories that I think need to be better known. Let me put it that way. And the riding refers to riding the freedom train.
Mm. Do you still have goals at this stage of your career?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I recently had a live concert that was recorded that will be a follow-up album to this Riding album. And I was able to share the stage with the string quartet for some of the songs. And it really opened up a whole new sound. And I've played with strings before on record, but not live so much. And I really felt that the next big project might be something with strings, orchestra.
Wonderful. I will look forward to that. Eric, thanks so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. We're so looking forward to seeing you back here. You don't need me to tell you how much you're loved here in Australia. And we're certainly waiting with great anticipation to see you. Got my tickets already, so I can't wait there. I'll be there front and center.
What venue will you be at, John?
I'll be at the Mimo, which I think is a band gig, isn't it, in Melbourne?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye, Ulrika. Bye-bye.